We live in a time when focus has become a luxury. Distraction is no longer an occasional interruption. It has become the default state of mind. Walk into any coffee shop, workplace, or even your own living room, and you'll notice the same pattern. People half present, heads tilted toward glowing screens, minds split between the now and the next notification. Our phones vibrate more often than our hearts do with genuine emotion. Tabs stay open not only on our browsers, but also in our thoughts, an endless loop of unfinished ideas, fragmented attention, and shallow engagement. The world doesn't lack wonder or beauty. What it lacks is the depth of perception we used to bring to it before our senses were hijacked by the machinery of modern life. This epidemic of distraction didn't begin with malice, but with convenience. The devices we use were designed to make life easier, more efficient, and more connected. But somewhere along the way, the tools started shaping the user. The average person now checks their phone over 90 times a day. Think about that. 90 interruptions, each a break in thought, a derailment of presence. And these aren't neutral interruptions. They come with emotional hooks, fear of missing out, comparison, urgency, manufactured alerts that demand immediate attention but offer little in return. Each swipe chips away at our capacity for stillness, our patience for detail, and our ability to see beyond the surface of things. We're surrounded by a stream of stimuli designed not to inform or enrich, but to capture attention and keep it. We've entered an era where silence is awkward, boredom is unbearable, and waiting even 30 seconds is a trigger for impatience. But these moments, those gaps in stimulation, are precisely where observation thrives. When you're standing at a bus stop, sitting in a waiting room, or lying in bed before sleep, those quiet spaces used to be where reflection happened. You'd notice the way the light falls on a wall, the way someone's voice softens when they speak of someone they love, or the way a breeze moves through the leaves. But now those gaps are immediately filled with scrolling, tapping, refreshing. Our senses are constantly occupied, but rarely exercised. The consequences of this distraction go far beyond productivity or efficiency. They affect the very way we see the world. When attention is fractured, reality becomes flat. Depth disappears. We no longer engage with life as participants, but as consumers. A meal becomes a photo op, not a sensory experience. A conversation becomes background noise to a text thread. We skim headlines instead of reading stories. We scroll past images without seeing them. We are everywhere and nowhere at once, our minds darting from headline to highlight, rarely settling long enough to absorb meaning. And this isn't just a personal issue, it's a cultural one. Our collective ability to notice, to witness, to be deeply present is deteriorating, and with it, the very richness of our shared human experience. There was a time when noticing was a survival skill. Hunters, gatherers, farmers, they depended on acute awareness of their environment. A change in the wind, a rustle in the brush, a subtle shift in light could mean life or death. But even outside of survival, noticing was how we connected. Through eye contact, body language, pauses in speech. These were all forms of information that required full presence. But today, even when our bodies are in the same space, our attention is elsewhere, fragmented, distracted, and thinned out by the sheer volume of inputs. It's not that we've lost the ability to notice, it's that we've stopped giving attention the space it needs to function fully. What's even more troubling is that many of us no longer realize how distracted we are. Distraction has become such a normalized part of daily life that its presence goes undetected. We think we're paying attention when we're merely glancing. We think we're listening when we're actually waiting for our turn to speak. Or worse, checking our phones mid-conversation. We've become masters of divided attention and poor at recognizing its cost. Missed moments, shallow relationships, unprocessed thoughts, a growing sense of mental fatigue that no amount of rest seems to cure. And the irony is, the more distracted we are, the more anxious and overwhelmed we feel, prompting us to seek comfort in the very devices that cause the problem in the first place. There's something profoundly disorienting about this modern condition, the sense that we're drifting through our lives instead of living them. Distraction dulls our ability to be moved, to be inspired, to be present with our own experience. When we stop noticing, we stop relating to each other, to ourselves, to the world. And as our attention span shortens, so too does our capacity for wonder, depth, empathy, and connection. We become emotionally undernourished, intellectually overstimulated, and spiritually disconnected. Attention, at its core, is the lens through which we experience reality. It's not merely about seeing or hearing, it's about what we choose to focus on, consciously or unconsciously, and how that focus determines our understanding of the world. What we pay attention to becomes our reality. Everything else fades into the periphery. This isn't poetic exaggeration, it's neuroscience. The human brain processes millions of bits of information every second, but only a tiny fraction makes it into our conscious awareness. Our senses collect data non-stop, but attention is the gatekeeper. Without it, the sights, sounds, and sensations of life wash over us without leaving a mark. With it, even the smallest detail can become a source of meaning, insight, or transformation. The prefrontal cortex, often referred to as the executive center of the brain, plays a central role in attention. This region filters distractions, regulates decision-making, and allocates mental resources to tasks we deem important. But attention isn't fixed or unlimited. It's a limited cognitive resource. The more we divide it, the weaker its power becomes. That's why multitasking is a myth. When we try to do multiple things at once, reply to a text, scan a web page, listen to a conversation, we're not actually doing them simultaneously. The brain is task switching rapidly, and every switch carries a cognitive cost. We lose context, make more errors, and exhaust our mental energy faster. Sustained attention, by contrast, allows us to enter deeper cognitive states, like flow, concentration, and immersion, where the richness of experience intensifies and understanding deepens. Interestingly, attention is shaped not only by brain function, but also by perception and memory. What we've paid attention to in the past influences what we notice in the present. This is known as attentional bias. For example, someone who has recently learned to identify bird species will suddenly start noticing birds everywhere, not because there are more birds, but because their brain has been trained to pick them out from the noise. This bias forms a loop. We notice what we've conditioned ourselves to value, and by noticing it more, we reinforce that value. The implications are enormous. Attention doesn't just follow reality, it shapes it. This means that by consciously directing attention, we can actually alter our subjective experience of life. Another fascinating element is that attention is closely tied to emotion. Things that elicit strong emotional responses, fear, joy, surprise, grab our attention more readily than neutral stimuli. This is an evolutionary adaptation. Our ancestors needed to quickly detect threats and rewards in their environment to survive. But in the modern world, this mechanism can be hijacked. Social media platforms, news cycles, and advertisements are all engineered to trigger emotional reactions, keeping us locked in a loop of distraction. Our brains are drawn to novelty, but novelty without purpose creates chaos. We jump from one stimulus to the next, craving the next emotional jolt, and in doing so, lose the capacity for sustained, meaningful engagement with anything. The good news is that attention can be trained. Like a muscle, it can grow stronger with deliberate practice. Meditation, for instance, has been shown in numerous studies to increase attentional control by training the mind to return to a single point of focus, whether it's the breath, a mantra, or bodily sensations. Even a few minutes a day of focused attention practice can result in measurable changes in brain function, including increased gray matter in areas associated with learning and emotional regulation. Beyond meditation, simply engaging deeply with a task, reading, listening to music without distraction, observing a painting, can recondition the brain to value focus over fragmentation. These moments of intense presence, when repeated over time, rebuild our capacity to notice, to linger, and to appreciate. What's often overlooked is the feedback loop between attention and the quality of our lives. When we learn to give our full presence to something, a person, a task, a place, we experience a deeper connection. Conversations become more intimate. Art becomes more moving. Nature becomes more vivid. These aren't changes in the world itself, but in our way of perceiving it. The science tells us that what we attend to literally rewires our brains through neuroplasticity. Every moment of focused attention strengthens certain neural pathways while weakening others. If we consistently choose to attend to chaos, urgency, and conflict, our minds become tuned to that frequency. But if we cultivate attention towards stillness, beauty, and complexity, those qualities become more readily available to us, not only as perceptions, but as experiences. Attention also plays a critical role in learning and memory. We cannot remember what we never noticed, and we cannot learn what we do not engage with. The quality of our attention directly affects how well we absorb information and form lasting memories. This is why students who learn to manage distraction tend to perform better, not because they are inherently smarter, but because they give their minds the space and stability needed to encode knowledge effectively. Likewise, our emotional memories are often shaped by the intensity of attention we gave a moment. Think back to the most vivid memory you have. It likely involves a moment where you were entirely present, aware, and alive in your senses. We are conditioned to chase the spectacular. Our eyes scan the horizon for what's grand, exotic, or rare, and our culture rewards these pursuits. Vacations to distant places, once-in-a-lifetime experiences, the highlight reels on social media, these are the stories we celebrate. Yet, for most of us, life unfolds not in highlight reels, but in the quiet repetitions of daily routine. The commute, the laundry, the morning light coming through the same window, the routine greetings from neighbors, the hum of the refrigerator, the slightly chipped cup you use every day. These moments, so easily dismissed as ordinary, make up the vast majority of our lives. And what's tragic is not that they are simple or repetitive, but that we often pass through them without noticing the quiet richness they hold. The beauty in the mundane doesn't announce itself. It waits patiently for attention, revealing itself only to those willing to slow down and look again. There is an overlooked intimacy in the familiar. The scent of your home, not a candle or a spray, but the real, lived-in scent, is a marker of memory, a subtle sensory thread that connects today with every yesterday you've spent under that roof. The feel of worn bed sheets, or the way your hand knows the exact pressure to turn the same doorknob each day, these tactile experiences are silent rituals, anchoring us in place and time. There's something deeply grounding in the ordinary, something that reminds us we belong here, not just in grand achievements or dramatic changes, but in the repeatable, predictable patterns of our lives. These small, cyclical actions are not signs of a dull life. They are the architecture of stability, continuity, and unspoken meaning. Most of us underestimate how rich the present moment can be when approached without expectation. A patch of cracked sidewalk seen from the right angle becomes a miniature landscape. The steam rising from a cup of tea in early morning light takes on a ghostly, almost sacred beauty. There is poetry in peeling paint, in uneven shadows on the wall, in the quiet ticking of a clock. These are not decorative aesthetics. They are invitations to look deeper, to pause, to acknowledge that what surrounds us is alive with pattern, shape, rhythm, and even emotion, if only we give it the dignity of our full attention. We are not just observers, we are participants in the theater of the everyday, and the stage is more intricate than we give it credit for. The mundane moments are often where real presence happens because they aren't cluttered by performance or expectation. There is no pressure to be impressive while buttering toast, no audience when folding a shirt, slicing fruit, or untangling a necklace. These are moments of pure engagement with reality, and within them lies an unexpected kind of freedom, the freedom to simply be, to inhabit your life without the burden of drama or spectacle. These experiences don't need to be exciting to be meaningful. In fact, their quietness is their strength. They are whispers rather than shouts, offering depth instead of noise. When you learn to find beauty here, you no longer need to seek it elsewhere. You carry it with you. This shift in perception doesn't require any external change, only an internal one. It begins with curiosity, with the decision to look again at what you've seen 1,000 times before and ask, what have I been missing? It involves letting go of the assumption that familiarity means lifelessness. A tree you pass daily on your walk is not a single static object, but a dynamic being constantly in flux, budding, blooming, aging, shedding, responding to wind and rain and light. That street you've driven down countless times is filled with micro-narratives you've never considered. The mailbox with chipped paint, the slow crawl of rust on a fence, the way ivy sneaks up a brick wall year by year. These aren't embellishments. They are evidence of life unfolding at a scale we rarely tune into. There is a spiritual generosity in the mundane. It asks nothing of you but your presence. It does not need you to be successful, energetic, or inspired. It only asks you to witness, to offer your attention as a form of gratitude. In doing so, we find that the ordinary becomes sacred, not because it changes, but because we do. A sink full of dishes becomes an act of care, a moment of grounding, a reminder of nourishment shared. The sound of a child's footsteps, the rhythm of a clock, the warm silence shared with someone you love, none of these are grand, yet they carry a weight that defies their apparent simplicity. They are the things you miss deeply when they're gone. They are the essence of life when all else is stripped away. We spend much of our lives insulated from our senses. Modern living, in its obsession with convenience and speed, has gradually dulled the sharp edges of sensory experience. We live behind screens, walk with headphones in, eat distractedly, and often treat our bodies as vehicles for productivity rather than as vessels of perception. Yet the senses, sight, sound, touch, taste, and smell, are the oldest and most honest ways we connect with the world. Long before we had words or concepts, we had sensation. It was through touch that we first knew comfort, through sound that we first recognized safety, through scent and taste that we formed some of our earliest and most enduring memories. To reconnect with the senses is not just to notice the world differently, it's to return to a more grounded, more truthful relationship with it. Reawakening sensory experience means noticing not only what we see, but how we see. Our eyes take in light, shape, contrast, and color constantly, yet most of it passes through us without registering. When you start to pay deliberate attention, light transforms. The way it pours across a wooden table, the play of shadows through tree branches on pavement, the golden hue of early evening becomes not just background but narrative. These visual textures are not just decorative, they carry emotional tones. They shift with weather, with seasons, with time of day. And when you look more closely, really allow yourself to linger with what you see, your visual world stops being functional and starts being expressive. You're no longer just seeing to navigate, you're seeing to understand. Sound is perhaps the most neglected of the senses, despite its omnipresence. In a noisy world, our brains have learned to filter and suppress much of what we hear to protect our focus. But in doing so, we miss the subtlety, the layers, the music that life constantly composes around us. The rustling of leaves, the distant hum of traffic blending with birdsong, the click of a heating system turning on, even the rhythm of footsteps on different surfaces. These auditory textures form the unseen architecture of place and moment. There's a quiet intimacy in tuning back into them. When you allow sound to enter not as interference, but as presence, it changes your awareness. You begin to realize that silence is never truly silent, and even the most mundane environment has a voice if you are willing to listen. Touch, too, has been reduced in modern life to utility. We touch to grasp, swipe, carry, or manipulate, but rarely do we touch to experience. The sensation of fabric against skin, the weight of a book in the hand, the texture of a wall as you lean against it, the contrast between warm sunlight and cool air on your arm. These are moments of tactile truth. They are grounding, immediate, and often emotionally charged. We forget how soothing the grain of wood can be beneath our fingers, or how emotionally rich the act of holding a warm mug can feel on a cold morning. To truly reconnect through touch is to slow down and acknowledge that every object we interact with has a texture, a temperature, a form that speaks to the body in its own language. Smell and taste often work in tandem, both deeply tied to memory and emotion. The smell of rain on hot pavement, of a particular soap, of spices heating in oil. These can transport us instantly to a different time or state of mind. But how often do we pause to truly breathe something in? Our meals are rushed, often eaten while multitasking, robbing us of the sensory experience of nourishment. We forget that taste is not just about flavor, but texture, temperature, sequence. A single bite contains crunch, softness, saltiness, sweetness, bitterness, yet we barely register it. Sensory reconnection asks us to slow down, to experience food not as fuel but as presence, and beyond food to become attuned to the way every environment has a scent, every room, every street, every change in weather. What makes sensory reconnection so powerful is its simplicity. It doesn't require new technology, travel, or instruction. It asks only for attention and willingness. These sensory inputs are already there, already happening, already surrounding us. They don't need to be extraordinary to be profound. The act of tuning back into them is, in itself, an act of restoration. It restores connection to self, to space, and to the present moment. The senses are not simply tools for collecting data. They are translators of reality. They take the external world and bring it inside of us, make it real, intimate, and meaningful. And when we let them, they show us not just where we are, but how to be there fully. Attention, in its purest form, is the ability to choose what matters. It is not merely a passive state of awareness, but an active force. A deliberate act of prioritizing one slice of reality over another. While often underestimated, attention is arguably the most powerful tool we have, not only for navigating life, but for shaping it. Every breakthrough, every work of art, every meaningful relationship, and every act of healing begins with attention. What we choose to notice and invest ourselves in becomes the blueprint for our inner world. Yet, in an age where distractions have become the norm and attention is constantly under siege, the ability to focus has become more than just a helpful trait. It has evolved into a rare and transformative superpower. In the digital era, attention is both currency and commodity. Corporations compete not for your money first, but for your gaze. Algorithms are built to hijack your attention, to keep you scrolling, watching, consuming. Every ping, notification, and dopamine-triggering alert is designed to fracture your focus into smaller and smaller fragments until your ability to remain with one thought, one task, or one emotion feels almost unnatural. In this context, regaining control over your attention is not just a matter of productivity. It is a quiet act of rebellion. It is a way of reclaiming your autonomy, of deciding for yourself what is worthy of your awareness and what is merely noise. The power lies not in resisting technology altogether, but in using it consciously, refusing to be a passive endpoint for every piece of digital debris floating in your direction. The strength of attention is not measured by how long you can concentrate, but by the depth and clarity with which you can engage. When attention is fully focused, the experience of time changes. Moments elongate, details sharpen, and what once seemed mundane takes on a new richness. A deep conversation, a well-written paragraph, a melody that pulls emotion from silence. All of these are magnified through the lens of focused attention. The world stops being a blur and starts becoming a mosaic, each tile vivid and defined. You begin to notice how much life exists in a single second when you are completely present in it. It is in these seconds, these fully inhabited, consciously chosen moments, that insight, creativity, and genuine connection emerge. Moreover, attention is a gateway to agency. So many people feel adrift in their own lives, as if circumstances shape them more than they shape their circumstances. But attention is the first lever of control. When you change what you focus on, you begin to change what you value. And what you value changes what you do. This is not abstract theory. It is neurological reality. Our brains are wired to strengthen the connections we use most. The more we focus on something, the more that neural pathway is reinforced. By choosing to consistently direct attention toward growth, kindness, patience, or beauty, we actively rewire ourselves to see and respond to the world differently. Attention becomes the soil in which habits grow, identities form, and futures are built. In relationships, attention is love in action. It is how we show that we see someone, that they are real to us, important to us, that their words are not background noise, but something worthy of being received. It is the difference between shallow interaction and true connection. We remember how people made us feel not because of grand gestures, but because of the moments when they were truly present with us, without phones, without agendas, without drifting off mid-sentence. To give another person your undivided attention is to gift them a sense of significance, a mirror in which they feel seen. And in doing so, you too are transformed. Because in those moments of shared focus, we are reminded of our shared humanity, of the quiet intimacy that can exist between two people simply choosing to be fully there. Perhaps what makes attention such a profound power is that it is both invisible and cumulative. No one sees the moment you choose to return to your breath during stress. No one applauds when you resist the impulse to check your phone and instead sit with the discomfort or beauty of the present. Yet these moments add up. They become a way of being, a silent discipline that strengthens your presence, your resilience, and your clarity. Attention is not dramatic. It doesn't demand a stage, but it changes the quality of everything it touches. It transforms consumption into observation, movement into intention, noise into signal. It sharpens perception and elevates experience, and most importantly, it allows you to live deliberately rather than reactively, to carve meaning from chaos, and to decide what kind of reality you wish to inhabit, one choice of focus at a time. To become a noticer in a world that constantly pulls us away from the present is not something that happens by accident. It is a practice, a cultivated way of being. It demands intentionality, a deliberate decision to slow down and look at life through a different lens. The truth is, noticing is not a talent bestowed upon a few mindful individuals. It is a habit that anyone can develop. But like all meaningful habits, it must be anchored in ritual. A noticer's ritual is not about ceremony or rigidity. It's not about following a step-by-step routine or forcing attention into scheduled time slots. Rather, it is about creating sacred spaces in daily life where presence can naturally arise, where the ordinary is given enough space to reveal itself as extraordinary. It is about designing your life with tiny openings, pauses, moments, gestures that act as doorways into deeper awareness. It often begins with the body. Rituals that reawaken noticing usually start by reconnecting us to our physical senses, since the body is always in the present even when the mind is not. The simple act of taking a conscious breath, feeling it fill your lungs, noticing its rhythm, the temperature of the air, can become an anchor, a threshold between distraction and presence. This breath might happen in the morning before you check your phone, or while washing your face, or while waiting at a red light. These are not grand rituals. They are quiet permissions to arrive fully. A noticer's ritual lives in the cracks of the day, not in the loud, orchestrated performances of mindfulness, but in the soft repetition of gentle return. Objects and environments can become part of this practice. A certain cup used only for tea, a windowsill where the light hits just right, a pen that you always use to write reflections in a specific notebook. These are not material indulgences, but sensory anchors. They remind you that attention is not something to chase, but something to settle into. When we assign significance to a particular object or place through repetition, it begins to speak to us in subtle ways. The ritual is not in the object itself, but in the consistency of our noticing around it. The act of lighting a candle before sitting down to reflect, or of walking the same path each evening with the intention of seeing something new, creates a rhythm that tells the mind, this is the moment we show up fully. Time, too, plays a role, but not in the sense of strict scheduling. A noticer's ritual is not about carving out an hour of silence each day in a monastery-like atmosphere. It's about finding pockets of time already available and transforming them into thresholds. The 2 minutes while the kettle boils, the 3 breaths before answering a phone call, the few seconds between sitting in the car and turning on the ignition. These moments, when reclaimed from autopilot, become powerful containers for attention. Over time, they accumulate a kind of gravity. They signal to the brain that this is not empty time, it's noticing time. The ritual becomes a kind of muscle memory for awareness, drawing us back into ourselves and into the world without force. Another aspect of the ritual involves intention. The noticer doesn't just look, they choose how to look. You might begin the day by selecting a theme. Today I will notice textures, or colors, or the sounds of water. This is not to limit what you see, but to sharpen your orientation. It's like tuning an instrument before playing. You're preparing your mind to hear and see with greater fidelity. Over time, this intentional orientation becomes automatic. You start noticing without needing to remind yourself. What begins as a conscious ritual becomes a subconscious habit of depth. You walk through the same places, but you see them anew. You live in the same body, but you feel it more fully. You engage in the same conversations, but you hear more between the lines. Reflection is the final thread that weaves the ritual together. Noticing without reflection is like catching rain in your hand, momentary and gone. But when you take a moment to record or sit with what you've noticed, even mentally, it deepens the groove. It need not be formal. A quick sentence jotted in a notebook. The shadows of leaves looked like water today. Or a silent observation whispered inward. The smell of soap on my shirt reminded me of my grandmother. These are not journal entries. They are memory seeds. They tether you to the realness of your day in a way that screen time never could. Over time, these reflections become a map of presence, a personal archive of attentiveness that shapes how you move through the world. The ritual of noticing becomes not only a way of experiencing life, it becomes a way of living it.